Hello, my friends. Today I'd like to present to you a pretty interesting and mysterious figure from history named Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich. And as it says here on his Wikipedia page, Spiridovich was a Russian count and a Tsarist general. For the Tsarist regime before the Bolshevik Revolution, he fled Russia following the Bolshevik Revolution. And the most interesting thing about him is that he authored a book, as it says here on Wikipedia, a book positing a concise conspiracy consisting of 300 Jewish families titled Secret World Government or The Hidden Hand. And you could find this book on archive.org. The full title is The Secret World Government or The Hidden Hand, The Unrevealed in History, 100 Historical Mysteries Explained. And this book is pretty interesting. If you have time, I would recommend giving it a read. But in this video, I kind of want to verify Spiridovich's identity by going into histories that have been written about him and newspaper articles from his time, contemporary newspaper articles written about him, because he was seemingly a very popular figure and well known in his time. And the fact that he's so unknown today is interesting in and of itself, because he was something of a celebrity in his time, and sort of try to determine his credibility, because there are quite a few inconsistencies in the stories that have been told about him, and especially about his death, which was called accidental at first and then a suicide, but people were convinced he was murdered. And there are a number of other inconsistencies about him, and the fact is that this guy certainly was an insider. He had access to inside information and was in a privileged position for that kind of information, and I'm not exactly sure myself whether he was genuine. It seems as though he was genuine and legitimate, and was perhaps even killed for his writings. But at the same time, I don't really know what to believe anymore sometimes when it comes to these sorts of people, these insiders. I'm not sure. It could possibly be some kind of 4D chess psyop that I'm just not seeing right now. But you guys hopefully let me know in the comments. And so I want to go over these old newspaper articles about him that I've pulled up here and just review the details, and especially about his very suspicious death, and maybe go on some interesting tangents along the way about newspaper reporting in general back in the early 20s and 19 teens. So let us begin. I'd like to begin with a history written about him on this website, the knightsofstjohn.com. Spiridovich was a high-ranking member of this chivalric order. And this website on its own, by the way, I just want to sort of establish the credibility of this website, or at least give it some weight, because it seems a little sketchy when you first look at it. But apparently this website was cited in an apparently respected academic journal called the Journal for the Study of Anti-Semitism. And I know a Journal for the Study of Anti-Semitism being respected, that's a joke in and of itself. But the fact that I'm trying to get at here is usually scholars who write in these kinds of peer-reviewed academic journals are scrutinized for their sources. And if this journal was using this history of the Knights of Malta, the Sovereign Order of St. John, then presumably it's a decent enough source. So this isn't just some random individual who's written this. This seems to be, at least in some respect, an official history. So here's the first mention of Spiridovich in this history. In 1893, the Russian ambassador to the United States, Prince Cantacuzene, Russian Admiral Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich, and Russian Transportation Commissioner Colonel A. Cherep-Spiridovich introduced the Russian Sovereign Order of St. John White Cross at the Chicago World's Fair to American civic leaders. So he was apparently the Russian Transportation Commissioner in 1893. The next mention of Spiridovich in this calls him the president of the Slavonic Society of Moscow. Further, the Grand Duke was the patron of this Slavonic Society, of which Cherep-Spiridovich was president. And in the next paragraph it says, Major General Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, president of the Slavonic Society, was thereby one of the earliest members of any intelligence service to see the protocols of the Elders of Zion. He was given the mandate by the Russian imperial family to investigate the matter fully and to spread the alarm about the hidden hand of international Zionism and its plan to gain global control through the elimination of the Christian church. That's the first bit of, I think, disinformation that we've gotten. I don't think that the Christian church was the number one enemy of international Zionism. Perhaps at a time there was a faction within the Christian church that opposed the international order, but it didn't do a very good job. But anyway, this is just to establish that Spiridovich was a high-ranking official that was an insider. He was in the know, so to speak. And he associated with other high-ranking figures routinely. And just to give a final bit of information that I think is important in this article, it mentions quite clearly, here's other information about Spiridovich presenting, was presented personally to J. Edgar Hoover. He was supported by Grand Duke Cyril and Boris Brassol, who was another famous figure in anti-Semitic history, who helped to popularize the protocols of the Elders of Zion. He was closely associated with him. And Queen Marie of Romania, she'll be important later because apparently she was going to show up at a major conference that Spiridovich was going to give just before his death. But the important bit is that this history openly states that in 1927, after the assassination of Count Cherep-Spiridovich, the Sovereign Order of Malta, or whatever, Military Order of Malta, started their American Association. So this history of the Order of Malta openly makes the claim, unambiguously makes the claim, that Spiridovich was assassinated. So keep that in mind as we go through newspaper articles. So I'm going to jump to the first article that I have found on Spiridovich. It was in January 18th, 1907, published in the New York Times. Russian Cup for Roosevelt. Gift of the Pan-Slavic League to be presented by its president. Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, president of the Pan-Slavic League, is to leave here tomorrow for Washington. This is reported from St. Petersburg. On behalf of the League, or to present to Roosevelt on behalf of the League, a cup for his services in the bringing about of the Portsmouth Conference. The Portsmouth Conference was the peace conference that brought an end to the Russo-Japanese War. So this establishes what the Order of Malta's history said, which is that Spiridovich was associating with high-level state officials. He certainly was an insider. Here's the next article also from 1907, March 28th. Count Spiridovich gives a luncheon. Russian general entertains at St. Regis, which is a high-class ritzy hotel in New York City, eulogizing Tsar in a speech. Count Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, a major general in the Russian army and president of the Slavonic Society of Russia, and also of the Latino-Slavic League of Paris and Rome. I think at this time, by the way, Latino meant Latin speakers, not Mexicans. So the French and Italians and Spanish were considered Latino, I think. Gave a luncheon yesterday at the St. Regis to a number of guests, among whom were Samuel L. Clemens, Mark Twain. It's kind of a strange and random figure to have been there. General Nelson A. Miles, General Grant Wilson, Russian Consul Baron Schilling, and Baroness Schilling. After Mr. Clemens paid some compliments to Count Spiridovich, the latter said, "I thank you for your sympathetic interest, which I attribute to my having come from Russia." Anyway, this also just sort of establishes how well connected Spiridovich was, how respected he seemed to be at the time. And although, to play devil's advocate, and I will be doing this periodically throughout this presentation, it's interesting and kind of strange that Spiridovich, who is supposedly against the globalist agenda, was praising Andrew Carnegie as one of the best men in America, saying, Andrew Carnegie, one of your best men, has already materialized the idea of the Tsar by building a Temple of Peace in The Hague. The Temple of Peace is the building where the Court of International Arbitration presides. And it seems like that, in and of itself, was a step toward globalism, a step toward internationalism. So, just something to keep in mind, that Spiridovich was promoting this. I mean, it could have been naive. It could have been that he was just an enemy party to the Jewish Zionist order, but he still kind of wanted a similar world empire, just of his own vision. But either way, just something to keep in mind. Here's the next article, which I think is particularly interesting, that it jumps forward in time from 1907 to 1921. General Spiridovich ill. Ex-Russian army officer goes to Bellevue with erysipelas, which is a skin infection. But the interesting bit is one detail in this article. Arthur Spiridovich, 52 years old, who has been living at the Hotel Polonia at 161 East 23rd Street, was taken to Bellevue Hospital last night suffering from the skin infection. To information clerks, he gave the name of his best friend as Mr. McAdoo of 120 Broadway. And I did a search of McAdoo 120 Broadway, and the only McAdoo that makes any sense at this time who was living at this address, according to congressional records, was William Gibbs McAdoo. And this individual presided over the establishment of the Federal Reserve System. A big-time spook insider. And this article, published in 1921, seems to come after the time indicated by the International Journal of Blacksmiths and Drop Forgers. Seems to be after the time that Spiridovich was already writing about a world conspiracy. It says the writer of this article has been following the author, Spiridovich, the author's work for 5 years. And this was published in 1924. So the writer of this article has known about Spiridovich's predictions relative to a world conspiracy since 1919, 5 years before 1924. So in 1919, Spiridovich is writing about a world conspiracy, apparently. And in 1921, Spiridovich has a best friend named Mr. McAdoo, the one who would go on to preside over or who already presided over the establishment of the Federal Reserve System. Interesting. Not sure what to make of it. Perhaps Spiridovich was convinced that the people he was working with were not part of this world conspiracy. He does mention in his book that he thinks America is one of the last countries to have not fallen completely under the influence and power of the conspirators, I believe. But it's hard to tell if he's naive or if, like I said, he's playing some kind of 4D chess psyop that I can't figure out. But it's just, I can't understand how he could be best friends with Mr. McAdoo and also supporting the Andrew Carnegie's establishment of the Peace Palace and all of this, and also writing about a world conspiracy where a hidden hand has taken control over the governments of the world and is bringing about a global empire, a hidden global world empire. It's hard for me to understand. Make of it what you will. This article is one that I would like to spend a little time on. It's titled "For World Union of White Races." And I think it's worth reading all the way through, or at least reading a good portion of it. Major General Count Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, direct descendant from the Grand Dukes of Russia, tells how the Anglo-Latino Slav League, of which he is president, aims to unite the white peoples of the globe against the domination of the colored peoples, who outnumber them 2-1. And this is published in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Could you imagine an article like this being published today? It would never happen. Here's a little blurb above his picture, says, Major General Count Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, as president of the Anglo-Latino Slav League, has established his headquarters in New York City. His father was Russian, his mother was Polish, and he swore at her deathbed to free all the Slavs, and, with this in view, he has studied foreign politics for 40 years, and has fought for the Slavs for 25 years. Predicted last World War in his book, published in 1913, and now says, unless preventative steps for peace are taken, the next war will be one of races more terrible than any in history, forecasts combination of yellow, brown, red, and black men. And by the way, this is the first time, if you go through the older newspaper articles written about him, it's the first time that Spiridovich's ideas about race were ever mentioned. And I think actually the last time it's ever mentioned. This idea that he wants to unite the white peoples of the world against domination of the colored peoples, this is the only article that I've found that mentions this idea. And this article, I don't think I said, was from June 19th, 1921. So around the time that he was sick, a couple months after he went to the hospital. To organize the English-speaking Latin and Slav peoples into an impregnable bloc, to prevent wars, bloodshed, and pogroms, to oppose Bolshevism, to spread the English language throughout the world as an international language. That is the bold and startling program of the Anglo-Latino Slav League, which has its headquarters at 161 East 23rd Street. That's the address that they gave here. In this union, there would be 550 million Anglo-Saxons, Latins, and Slavs, a combination of the white races of the world. Why the need for such a union? The League has one object in view, to preserve the white race, and it holds that to preserve the race, the leadership of the white race must pass to the United States of America. The passing of the great white race is not a new idea. Students of the races and mankind, of natural history, of geography, of civilization, have expanded this idea and have demonstrated in quite a satisfactory manner, by birth statistics, by the law of fecundity, and by the greed and ambition of nations that the white race in the march of years, must succumb to the domination of the colored race, unless some preponderant plan of prevention be devised by the great white race now dominant. Most of us are thinking little of this today. Perhaps too many of us are thinking too little, and that little thinking, perhaps, pertains almost entirely to things of today. But if we take time for a moment and turn to the political and racial maps of the world, we shall see the political division to be 9/10 white, while the racial division is only 1/3 white. So basically, whites controlled 9/10 of the world's territory, but in terms of population, we're only 1/3. Now I think it's more like whites are like a sixth or even less. And the remaining 1/10 of the political power of the world is held by the 2/3 racial division, which is composed of the yellow, brown, and red men designated as the colored race. Here, then, is our white world today: Europe, the Siberian part of Asia and Australasia, North America to the Rio Grande, and the southern part of South America. And here is our colored world today: practically the whole of Africa, the greater part of Asia, the larger portion of South America and Central America. Of land areas, the whites occupy 22 million square miles, the colored races 31 million square miles. In this connection, we should not lose sight of the fact that 1/3 of the area held by the whites is sparsely inhabited. So it goes on and basically discusses Spiridovich's idea of uniting the whites, unifying all white people under a single political bloc, it seems like. And I don't know. You can make of this what you will. Could it be a genuine desire to preserve the white race? It could be. It very well could be. Could it be a step in the direction of globalism? Sort of an intermediate step to getting white people to accept internationalism and mixing of peoples, even if it's just among white peoples? Could be. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. But it's interesting that this is the only article I could find where it specifically talks about this world union of white races in order to preserve the existence of the white race. The next article, published in 1926, this is 5 years later, mentions also Count Spiridovich's plan to formulate a new empire, it says. However, in this article, Spiridovich is not really, his conflict between the white races and the colored races is not emphasized at all. It's not even included. It's more so about the Slavs uniting. He says that he wants a United States of Slavs, as it says here. At first comprising Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Poland, and later including Russia. But an interesting detail from this article is that it says that his Slav convention is meant to take place between October 20th and October 30th of 1926, which is just a couple months after this. So those are dates to remember, the 20th to the 30th. Spiridovich dies on the 24th, I believe. And yes, here's the first article mentioning his death, so the 23rd. However, in this article, even though in the previous article it said that the conference was meant to begin on the 20th, this article says that the conference begins, or was supposed to begin, next Monday after the 23rd. The 23rd, I believe, was like a Wednesday in 1926. So that's just one inconsistency. But the focus here is, this is the first article about Spiridovich's death. So it would have actually been the 22nd, because it says here, Spiridovich, whose ambition it was to unite millions of Slavs all over the world, died of gas poisoning yesterday in his room at Barrett Manor. Asphyxiation followed the accidental dislodging of a petcock in a gas radiator. So this says it was an accident. It's pretty clear that it was an accident in this article, is what they're saying. Another interesting detail from this article was it goes over a bit of his history, that he had been figured frequently in the news columns in the past 25 years. In 1907, he presented Roosevelt with a silver cup on behalf of the Slavonic Society. In 1908, it was reported, this is an interesting bit, in 1908 it was reported that Cherep-Spiridovich was interested in finding 2 rich American girls as brides for the sons of King Alexander of Serbia. Subsequently, it was rumored that he himself was engaged to marry a wealthy American widow. A dispatch from St. Petersburg said that while the Count was of a good family, he had been made a noble by the Vatican and not by Russia. It was said that he was a member of an excellent Lithuanian family, but that his title of Count had never been recognized in Russia. The Count defended himself from these attacks. He said that he had been made a Roman Count by Pope Pius X, and that he had 68 generations of nobility behind him. He denied having Serbian blood and asserted that the aspersions appearing in the American press were engineered by German, Austrian, and Turkish police agents. So St. Petersburg was saying that he was from an excellent Lithuanian family, but if you remember, this article in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle from 1921 said that his father was Russian and his mother was Polish. It's an instance of inconsistency. There's a lot of these inconsistencies, as I've said. And it says here, another interesting bit, the Count was fond of telling acquaintances of how he averted a European war 12 years ago, and that he was well versed in European affairs and frequently spoke of his talks with crowned heads of European nations. On a visit to this country in 1920, he was detained at Ellis Island for 2 days on orders from Washington. And it doesn't say in this article, and I couldn't actually find the article again. I'll try to find it. Maybe one of you can find it. But the reason he was detained on orders from Washington was that apparently there was an imposter going around using Spiridovich's name and scamming people. So that's an interesting bit. There was somebody who was pretending to be Spiridovich and scamming people. Make of that what you will. Continuing to this article here, published in the Jewish Daily Bulletin, October 25th, just 2 days after the first report of his death in the New York Times, which we just saw, this New York Times article. They report in the Jewish Daily Bulletin, Count Cherep-Spiridovich, Russian anti-Semite agitator, found dead in room. Spread legend of Jewish conspiracy. Planned Universal Gentiles League to combat Satanism and Jews. Count Arthur Cherep-Spiridovich, one of the rabid anti-Semitic agitators of the Russian Tsarist school, was found dead in his room at Barrett Manor, Staten Island, having inhaled gas from a gas radiator pipe. His suicide came on the eve of what he termed a Slav convention, which was to have taken place on Monday. So the consistency here is that they both say that the Slavic convention wasn't going to take place until the following week after his death. But this article, somehow, mere 3 days after his death, has concluded that Spiridovich committed suicide. This Jewish daily bulletin. And in another article from October 29th, a few days later, also states that he committed suicide. However, an article on the 27th doesn't say anything about his suicide. This article from New York Times. So it's only the Jewish press that was saying he committed suicide. The New York Times said that it was an accident, that his death was accidental. And this article just says that the Russian Naval Club was going to pay for his funeral. How sweet. So yeah, here's Wisconsin Jewish Chronicle also saying that his death was a suicide, that he inhaled gas from a gas radiator pipe. Now, this article, published October 31st in the New York Times, is the first New York Times article to mention a suicide. New investigation said to point to Cherep-Spiridovich's suicide to be buried tomorrow. They really wanted to bury this guy quick, it seems. Anyway, it just says that rumors that the Count had been murdered by Bolshevists, whom he had opposed bitterly for 20 years, the police conducted a second investigation. And after this second investigation, George P. Mord, deputy medical examiner, who concurred in the first report that the death had been accidental, yesterday changed his mind and admitted that suicide was quite probable in view of evidence that the police had discovered. Okay, so October 31st, the deputy examiner was saying it's probable that it was a suicide. But the very next day, November 1st, rites of splendor for the Russian Count, 150 exiles holding lighted candles file past coffin of Cherep-Spiridovich. 150 members, blah, blah, blah. He had a big turnout for his funeral, had a choir and everything. Detectives view body. Before yesterday's services, Captain Ernest Van Wagner, Lieutenant William McKay, and several detectives of the 2nd Detective Division entered the house, viewed the body, and made a minute inspection of the room in which the Russian noble had died. The rumors that his death might have been due to the machinations of his enemies, and also that the aged man, penniless, and fighting apparently for a forlorn battle, had taken his own life, were believed to have caused the visit. So this is mentioning that penniless and fighting an apparently forlorn battle. I forgot to say, in this article, the suicide article, published on the 31st, contradicts the first article about his death. Hoped to unite people. Spiridovich died on the eve of a Slav convention that he had planned to begin Monday, after years of planning. But now on the 31st, they're saying, oh, he committed suicide as a result of abject poverty and the complete failure of his scheme to unite the 200 million Slavs in this country and Europe into a republic. How could he have failed completely if his convention hadn't even taken place? It says here, it was learned yesterday that he had sent out letters to Slavs in this country and abroad for a great conference to be held on October 18th And he announced that Queen Marie of Romania, who we saw, by the way, in the history of the Knights of Malta, they were in the same chivalric order. He had announced that the Queen of Romania would attend. On October 18th, the aged count waited for the Slavs to appear. Only one came. Only one man came. So this story, I should have mentioned, completely contradicts their first story, which is that the conference didn't even happen yet. That's even what the Jews were reporting, was that the conference hadn't even happened yet. But then on the 31st, when the New York Times said it was a suicide, the conference happened and it was a complete failure. Only one guy showed up. But then the very next day, they report that there was a huge turnout for his funeral. Why would so many people turn up for his funeral to support him, but not his conference? Why were all of these Russian exiles in New York City ready to attend his funeral, but not his conference? Doesn't make much sense. But anyway, however, this article concludes, the death certificate displayed last night showed the death was accidental. George Mord, the medical examiner, the same guy from the previous article, decided so. So now he's going back again to it was accidental. It was accidental, then it was a suicide, then it was accidental again. So, what can we conclude here? I mean, not too much. He's an interesting figure. He definitely was an insider. And I think that his book is worth reading. It's a little repetitive at times, but the best thing about this book is there are extensive citations, footnotes, and quotations from other sources that support the ideas of the Judeo-Masonic hidden oligarchy. And this book, in and of itself, I think could be literally a textbook for people to study, because there are just so many quotes, so many obscure quotes that I've looked up. I go and I check back to all these different quotes and citations that he gives, and I haven't found a single one that is not legit. So it's a good learning material to just see a giant compilation of references to these anti-Semitic conspiracy literature that was going around during Spiridovich's time. So, and he gives sort of a history of the revolutions, the democratic revolutions that were happening in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries, describes how this hidden oligarchy was behind the revolutions of his time, and it's worth checking out if you have time to read it. It's only 200 pages. But in the end, I'm still a bit ambivalent about Spiridovich. He had a lot of very strange connections, but at least his writing was good, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Could have been a little bit rambling and meandering for a while there, but I think there's a lot of good information, and I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching.